No one arrives in Graymoor by accident. That was the first sentence that crossed Ethan Cross's mind when the road simply ended. There was no warning, no rusted sign, no sharp curve or marked detour. The asphalt road, which until then cut through the forest like a gray, endless scar, was slowly swallowed by an increasingly thick fog until it became an uneven dirt path, damp and covered in rotting leaves. The car's GPS had stopped working almost 20 minutes earlier, frozen on a blank white screen, as if it had given up trying to understand where they were. The silence inside the vehicle was absolute, broken only by the low hum of the engine and the irregular clicking of the hazard lights. Lights Ethan did not remember turning on. He was alone. And for the first time since leaving the big city, he felt that this was not normal. Graymoor emerged slowly, like a forgotten memory rising from the depths of the mind. Low, old buildings, covered in soot and the marks of time. Storefronts with broken windows, some still displaying mannequins dressed in outdated clothes. Wide suits, long dresses, shoes worn down by decades. There were no people, no parked cars, no sign of recent human life. The fog did not float. It clung to the streets, thick, heavy, almost solid. It wrapped around darkened lampposts, curled around corners, slid slowly across sidewalks like something alive, like something searching. Ethan parked the car in the middle of the main street without knowing exactly why. His body simply reacted. An old primal instinct told him that going any farther would be a mistake. He turned off the engine. The silence that followed was so intense it made his ears ache. There was no wind, no birds, no insects. It was as if sound itself had been ripped from that place. When he stepped out of the car, the cold hit him in an unnatural way. It wasn't the ordinary cold of an abandoned town. It was a cold that didn't come from the air, but from the space between things, as if reality itself were hollow, incomplete. Each step echoed far too loudly. The sound of his boots against the asphalt felt almost offensive to that place. Ethan felt something strange, pressure in his chest, the uncomfortable sensation of being watched. Not by eyes, not by windows, but by the environment itself. The buildings seemed to lean inward, as if the city were bending around him, slowly tightening. In the center of the main street lay a fallen sign, partially swallowed by fog. He approached and wiped its surface with the sleeve of his coat. The name was carved in deep letters, almost as if they had been forced into the metal. Graymoor below it, in smaller, nearly illegible letters, a phrase, "What is seen here does not leave." A chill ran down Ethan's spine. He didn't believe in omens. He didn't believe in curses. He didn't believe in wrong places. He was an investigative journalist, a skeptic, a man who had spent years covering crimes, cults, disappearances, and stories that bordered on the absurd. Graymoor was just another name on a list of abandoned towns, or so he thought. But in that moment, something inside him already knew. He should not be there. The first sign that Graymoor was not empty came subtly. A radio. As he walked toward an old hotel at the end of the street, the only building with a partially lit sign, Ethan heard a faint, distorted sound cutting through the fog. Static. It didn't come from the car. It didn't come from any specific place. It was as if the sound existed in the air itself. Between the crackles of interference, a voice appeared and disappeared, murmuring disconnected words. Ethan stopped, holding his breath, trying to identify the language. It was English. But wrong. The words repeated, warped, as if someone were speaking through water or flesh. "Don't look!" The radio suddenly grew louder, making Ethan clutch his ear. He turned around, searching for the source of the sound, until he realized it was coming from inside the hotel. The building looked far too old to still be operating. Broken windows, torn curtains swaying slightly, even without wind. The front door stood ajar. The sign above flickered weakly. Graymoor Inn. When Ethan pushed the door open, the sound stopped instantly. The interior was even more disturbing. The lobby was coated in thick dust, as if no one had set foot there in decades. But recent footprints crossed the floor in chaotic patterns. Some were too large to be human. Others looked dragged. The reception desk still held a metal bell. A guest registry lay open, with names written up to just a few days earlier. Ethan approached slowly and read the last signature. Date: yesterday. Name: Ethan Cross. The blood drained from his veins. That was impossible. With trembling hands, he flipped through earlier pages. The names repeated. The same signatures appeared on different dates, sometimes separated by years. Some names were crossed out. Others had strange symbols drawn beside them, unfinished circles, deep marks cutting through the paper as if the pen had been pressed far too hard. The reception bell rang by itself. The metallic sound echoed far too loudly in the dead silence. Ethan spun around. At the staircase leading to the upper floors, someone was standing. The figure did not move, did not breathe. It was just a dark silhouette, partially swallowed by fog, now seeping into the building. For one eternal second, Ethan had the impression he was looking at himself, but the thing's face was wrong. Where eyes should have been, there were only deep black voids. Its mouth was stretched into an impossible smile, far too wide, as if the flesh had been pulled beyond its limits. The creature tilted its head slowly, and then, in a voice identical to Ethan's, it whispered, "You arrived too early." The lobby lights went out, and Graymoor at last began to breathe, where the city begins to act, not merely observe. When the light went out, Ethan Cross did not scream, not out of courage, but because the air simply refused to enter his lungs. The darkness was not the absence of light. It was presence, dense, heavy. He felt as if something had been poured over his eyes like thick paint, suffocating not only his vision, but his thoughts. Silence returned, deeper than before, accompanied by an almost imperceptible sound. A slow, heavy rhythm, like distant breathing, inhale, exhale. The hotel was breathing. When the light returned, it did not do so all at once. It flickered, trembled, as if it were being forced to function against its will. The staircase was empty. The figure was gone. But Ethan knew, with a certainty that made him nauseous, that this did not mean safety. It meant Graymoor had decided to wait. He leaned against the reception desk, feeling his legs give way. His reflection in the cracked glass seemed delayed, as if it took a fraction of a second to follow his movements. He blinked repeatedly, trying to shake the sensation. "This isn't real," he muttered, his voice too weak to convince even himself. Journalists learn early to distrust their senses. Fatigue, isolation, stress. All of it could explain hallucinations. All of it could explain his name in the registry. But not the smile. Ethan decided to go upstairs. Standing still felt worse. Each step creaked too loudly, as if the sound were amplified by the building itself. The handrail was icy to the touch, not just cold, but dead. The dust on the steps showed recent footprints, going up and down. Many of them, in different sizes. On the second floor, the hallway stretched far longer than it should have for a building that size. The walls were covered in old wallpaper with floral patterns that repeated incorrectly, as if someone had copied the same section over and over without caring about continuity. All the room doors were closed, except one. At the end of the hallway, room 209 stood slightly ajar. A faint yellowish light pulsed slowly from within. Ethan's stomach tightened. He didn't remember seeing electricity working here before. With every step, the sensation of being watched intensified. It didn't come from behind the doors. It came from the walls, the ceiling, the floor beneath his feet, as if the entire city were aware of him and curious about his reaction. When he pushed open the door to room 209, the smell hit him first. Rust, dampness, and something far too sweet. Like decomposing flesh masked with cheap perfume. The room looked prepared. The bed was made. The sheets were far too clean for an abandoned place. On the nightstand, an old radio played softly, emitting only static, the same static he had heard outside. On the opposite wall, a large mirror covered nearly the entire space, and that's when Ethan noticed. In the reflection, he was not alone. There was something behind him, not a defined shape, not a complete body. It was like a dark stain, distorted, occupying the space where the empty room should have been. A silhouette that did not obey the rules of perspective, stretching and contracting slowly, as if trying to learn how to look human. Ethan spun around. Nothing. The room was empty. When he looked back at the mirror, the stain was closer, almost pressed against the reflection of his face. The thing's mouth opened in the mirror, but no sound came out. The radio crackled louder. "You were not supposed to remember," the distorted voice murmured. A sharp pain tore through Ethan's head, as if something were being forcibly ripped from his memory. Images flashed, fast and disjointed. A road swallowed by fog. Sirens in the distance. A fire. Muffled screams. A child crying. And then silence. He collapsed to his knees, clutching his head. "No," he whispered. "That's not mine." The pain stopped as abruptly as it had begun. When he looked up, the mirror was normal. The radio had shut itself off. The room looked ordinary. But something had changed. Ethan felt it deep in his chest, as if a door had been opened inside him. He fled the hotel, heart pounding. He needed air, needed to get out of that place. But when he stepped outside, he realized the city was no longer the same. The fog was lower now, nearly touching the ground, moving in slow waves. The streets seemed narrower, the buildings closer together. The sense of confinement was suffocating. And then he heard them. Footsteps, slow, dragging, coming from every direction. Silhouettes began to emerge from the mist. They did not run. They did not speak. They simply walked, erratically, like forgotten marionettes. Their bodies were twisted, some with limbs too long, others with heads tilted at impossible angles. None of them had faces. Where eyes, mouths, and noses should have been, there was only smooth, stretched skin, pulsing faintly, as if something beneath was trying to form. Ethan stepped back, panic finally breaking through the barrier of rationality. "What do you want?" he shouted, his voice echoing through the empty street. The creatures stopped, all at once. The fog froze. Then, in perfect unison, they turned their heads toward him. One stepped forward, and with a voice made of dozens of overlapping whispers, it replied, "We want you to remember." The siren sounded for the first time, a deep, continuous wail that tore through the entire city. Graymoor was fully awake, and Ethan Cross already belonged to it. Where Ethan begins to understand what Graymoor is, why he was brought back, and what happens to those who try to leave. The siren did not come from any single location. It did not echo between buildings or spread through the air like normal sound. It passed through everything: walls, flesh, memory. It was not a warning, not an alarm. It was a summons. Ethan Cross dropped to his knees in the middle of the street as the sound reached its peak. His entire body reacted as if it recognized the frequency. His stomach clenched violently. His teeth chattered, though he felt no cold. His thoughts fragmented, past and present colliding. The faceless creatures did not approach. They simply waited, like devotees before an ancient ritual. The siren stopped abruptly, leaving behind a void even more suffocating. Silence so complete that Ethan felt his own heartbeat was too loud, intrusive. He tried to stand, but his legs didn't respond at first. When he finally managed to rise, he realized the city had changed again. The lights, once flickering weakly, were now on. They didn't shine. They simply existed. A sickly yellow illumination that seemed to come not from bulbs, but from the air itself. The creatures were gone. In their place were people, men, women, children, walking the streets as if nothing were wrong. They laughed, talked, carried bags. Some entered shops that had been abandoned moments before. Others crossed the street without noticing Ethan, as if he were invisible. But something was wrong. They all had the same empty look. They all moved with mechanical precision. They all repeated small gestures in short cycles, like actors trapped in a play that never ends. A woman stopped in front of a shattered display window and adjusted her hair. 5 seconds later, she did it again, and again. A man tripped on the sidewalk, recovered, and tripped in the exact same spot once more. Ethan walked slowly, his heart hammering. "Hey," he said, touching the arm of a passing man. The touch froze his fingers. The man's skin was far too cold. Not like someone exposed to cold, but like something that produced no heat. The man slowly turned his face. His eyes were there, his mouth too, but something was deeply wrong with his expression. The facial muscles didn't move naturally. The smile looked glued on, forced, like a poorly fitted mask. "You came back too early," the man said, in the same voice Ethan had heard at the hotel. Then he continued on his way, as if nothing had happened. Ethan stepped back, panic transforming into something worse. Partial understanding. Graymoor wasn't abandoned, it was trapped. He entered the old municipal library, drawn by a strange sensation, as if something inside had been calling to him for a long time. The interior was far larger than the building's exterior suggested. Tall shelves vanished into darkness near the ceiling. The smell of old paper mixed with mold and something metallic. At the center of the library, a large table held dozens of files, old newspapers, yellowed photographs, police reports, all related to the same thing. Disappearances, entire families, children, travelers, rescue teams, all linked to the region where Graymoor should exist. But officially, Graymoor had never been registered. No official maps, no founding records, no abandonment decree. It was as if the city had been erased from reality, yet continued to exist by force, like a wound that refuses to heal. Among the documents, Ethan found something that made his breath catch. A fire report. Date, 15 years earlier. Location, Graymoor Heights Residential Complex. Cause, undetermined. Victims, 27 dead. Survivors, 1. The survivor's name was smudged, but the surname was still legible. Cross. The memories came back with violence. He remembered the smoke, the unbearable heat, the screams echoing through hallways. He remembered running, stumbling, looking back, and seeing doors closing by themselves. He had survived, but he shouldn't have. Graymoor does not forgive those who escape. The voice came from behind him. Ethan spun around. A woman stood between the shelves. Unlike the other people, she seemed aware, her eyes focused on him, truly. Her face bore deep exhaustion, like someone who hadn't slept in decades. "Who are you?" Ethan asked, his voice hoarse. "My name doesn't matter anymore," she replied, stepping closer. "No name lasts long here." "What is this place?" he pressed. "What happened here?" She took a deep breath as if each word cost something precious. "Graymoor is not a city," she finally said. "It's a container," she explained. The fire wasn't an accident. It was the result of something that had been growing for years. Collective guilt, secrets, silent violence. Children hurt behind closed doors, deaths covered up, crimes ignored. Graymoor absorbed it all, and when it could no longer contain it, it closed. "It traps people at the worst moment of their lives," she said. "Feeds on it, repeats it, distorts it, corrodes it." "Then why did I come back?" Ethan asked, his throat tightening. She looked at him with deep sadness. "Because you carried Graymoor with you when you ran." The ground trembled faintly. Outside, the siren began to sound again. Closer, louder. "It knows you're starting to remember," she said. "And that's something Graymoor doesn't allow for long." The library lights flickered. Outside, the people stopped simultaneously. Ethan felt a presence forming behind him. Something large, ancient, hungry. The city had decided to advance. Where Graymoor begins to punish, the survivors reveal the price of escape, and horror stops being symbolic and becomes physical. The siren was no longer distant. It vibrated inside Ethan's bones, reverberating in his skull like an internal echo, impossible to block out. Each pulse synchronized with something subterranean, as if massive structures were shifting beneath the city, rearranging streets, memories, and fates. The woman grabbed his arm with unexpected strength. "If you stand still, it will find you here," she said urgently. "Graymoor hates conscious witnesses." They ran. The library began to change as they fled. Shelves groaned and shifted on their own, blocking paths seconds after they passed. The floor became uneven, like poorly healed flesh. Loose pages floated in the air, caught in fog now flooding the building, carrying whispers. "Come back. You're not finished. You still need to remember everything." The voices came from everywhere and nowhere. When they finally reached the exit, the city had stopped pretending. The people in the streets were frozen, completely motionless. Their faces began to melt slowly, like wax under invisible heat. Human expressions slid away, revealing something raw and unfinished beneath. faces that had never been completed. A child turned its head toward Ethan. Its eyes were black, deep, without reflection. "Why did you leave and I didn't?" it asked, its childish voice fractured by something ancient. Ethan stumbled back, guilt crushing his chest. "I tried to help," he murmured, but the words rang hollow even to him. The woman pulled him again. "Don't answer," she whispered desperately. "It uses that against you." The first scream echoed through the city moments later. Human, real, shattering. It came from a side street, followed by a dry crack like bones snapping. Ethan looked. One of the people was being dragged into the fog by something invisible. The body twisted unnaturally, limbs bending backward as if being dismantled piece by piece. The mouth opened in a silent scream as the skin began to split, and words spilled out from inside. Sentences, names, pleas for help, everything that had never been spoken in life. When the fog retreated, nothing remained. "That's what happens when someone remembers too much," the woman said, her voice breaking, "or when they try to leave again." They hid in a partially destroyed residential building. The interior was dark, stifling, saturated with mold and dried blood. Apartment doors had been ripped off and deep scratches marred the walls, as if something had tried to get out, or in. "How many survived?" Ethan asked, gasping. The woman laughed, a short, humorless sound. "Survive isn't the right word," she said. "Some resist longer, others become part of the city too fast." "And you?" he asked. "How are you still like this?" She hesitated. "Because I accepted my guilt," she finally said. "Graymoor feeds on denial. When you admit what you did, it loses part of its hold." Ethan felt the weight of that truth. "The fire," he began. "It wasn't just an accident, was it?" She closed her eyes. The walls vibrated faintly, as if the city were listening. "No," she said softly. "The doors were locked from the inside. Someone decided it was better that certain things, certain people, didn't leave alive." Ethan's stomach churned. He remembered, arguing with a neighbor that night, hearing screams as he ran down the stairs, seeing the fire door being closed, and not opening it, not out of conscious cruelty, but fear. "I heard," he whispered. "I heard someone asking for help." The city reacted instantly. The building shook violently. The ceiling began to crack. Outside, the siren changed pitch, sharper, more aggressive. "It knows," the woman said, panic etched across her face. "Now it knows you remembered." The ground split partially before them, revealing a dark, pulsing void, like a massive throat opening beneath the city. "Graymoor will demand payment," she continued. "It always does." Something began to rise from the pit. It had no single form. It was made of fragments, hands, faces, pieces of bodies constantly fusing and separating. All screaming at once, yet producing no coherent sound. Among the faces, Ethan recognized some. People he had seen in the corridors that night. The child, the neighbor, all staring directly at him. "You left. You breathed. You abandoned us." Ethan collapsed to his knees, unable to look away. "I'm sorry," he sobbed. "I didn't know." The thing advanced. The woman stepped between them. "There's still one way," she shouted. "But it's final." "What?" Ethan cried. She looked at him with an expression of sorrow and relief. "Graymoor is only fully satisfied when the guilty take the place of the victims." The horror struck Ethan with absolute clarity. "You mean stay?" "No," she shook her head. "You mean descend." The ground began to give way. The entire city seemed to tilt toward that point. "If you face the heart of Graymoor," she said, "you might end the cycle, or become part of it forever." The thing was only meters away now. The siren stopped. Silence returned. Ethan made his decision. Where Ethan descends into the living core of the city, faces the complete truth, and learns that redemption can be worse than damnation. The fall was not fast. That was what terrified Ethan Cross the most. He expected to plunge, to feel the brutal impact, maybe die right there. But Graymoor did not grant quick endings. The ground opened like a patient mouth, and he was swallowed slowly, the city above receding, distorted, like a nightmare that refuses to end. The woman remained behind, or perhaps she had never truly been there. As he descended, the darkness did not close in. Instead, it illuminated with fragments of memory. Walls of burned concrete, twisted staircases, numbered doors appeared around him, suspended in the void. It was the building, Graymoor Heights, entire, reconstructed, frozen outside time. Ethan touched solid ground at last. The impact was unnaturally gentle. The air was hot, heavy, thick with ancient smoke. Every breath dragged ash directly into his lungs. The corridor ahead stretched long, lit by red emergency lights that pulsed slowly, casting shadows that moved on their own. The distant sound of fire alarms echoed endlessly, muffled, as if coming from inside the city's flesh. Ethan recognized the corridor. He had run through it 15 years earlier. "You have returned to the exact point where you chose to live," said a deep voice coming from everywhere. It was not the woman's voice, not the creature's. It was Graymoor. The walls pulsed like they had veins. The floor vibrated beneath his feet. "I didn't choose anything," Ethan replied weakly. "I just ran." "Running is a choice," the city answered. It always was. Doors opened along the corridor. Inside each apartment, frozen scenes revealed themselves. A family pounding desperately on a door. A woman trying to break a window with her bare hands. A man kneeling, praying silently as smoke swallowed him. All alive, all aware, all trapped in the exact moment they understood they would not escape. Ethan's legs buckled. "I didn't start the fire," he whispered. "No," Graymoor replied, "but you completed it." The corridor stretched farther. At the end stood a metal door, warped by heat, covered in deep impressions of hands pressed into the surface as if dozens had tried to open it at once. "Behind this door," the city said, "is what you refused to remember." Ethan approached. With every step, the voices grew louder. Screams, pleas, broken promises. Each one cut into his mind like a blade. When he touched the handle, the door opened on its own. Inside was a space far too vast to exist beneath a residential building. A massive circular void where melted concrete fused with organic structures. Dark, pulsing flesh, breathing slowly. At the center rose something colossal, not a monster in the conventional sense. An agglomeration of bodies, fused into a single living mass. Faces surfaced and sank continuously, mouths opening in silent screams, eyes blinking in eternal desperation. All connected, all conscious. The heart of Graymoor. "We are here," the entity said, now speaking with hundreds of voices at once. Because no one stayed. Ethan dropped to his knees. "I was afraid," he cried. "I thought I couldn't help." "Fear is not the sin," the chorus replied. "The choice is." The entity moved. Parts separated, forming complete human figures that walked slowly toward Ethan. Each bore a familiar face, the neighbor, the child, the woman screaming in the corridor. "You breathed while we burned," they said in unison. "You ran while we stayed." "What do you want from me?" Ethan screamed. The heart pulsed violently, shaking the ground. "We want balance." The final understanding struck him. Graymoor did not seek blind revenge. It sought substitution. "One by one you forgot us," the entity continued. "So we became the place that cannot be forgotten." The figures drew closer. "If I stay," Ethan whispered. "Does it end?" "For the others, yes," Graymoor replied. "For you, no." The final horror revealed itself. He would not die. He would assume. "You will be what calls," the entity said. "The conscience, the memory, the living guilt." The figures touched Ethan. The world exploded in pain. He felt his bones rearrange, his skin stretch, his mind fracture, absorbing thousands of memories that were not his. Every death, every scream, every door that never opened. Ethan tried to scream, but his voice dissolved into hundreds of others. The heart of Graymoor pulsed one final time, and then fell still. The city above began to collapse. The fog dispersed. The streets vanished. Graymoor ceased to exist in the world of the living. But something remained. In the void where the city had been, A conscious presence stayed awake, waiting. Where the world moves on, but something watches, and the true horror reveals itself after the end. Graymoor did not end. It merely changed form. When the city vanished from the map, the world moved on as it always does after tragedies no one fully understands, with incomplete explanations, inconclusive reports, and convenient silence. A week later, rescue teams found only a charred clearing where an entire city should have stood. No buildings, no roads, no signs. Just hardened ash mixed with soil, forming strange patterns, imperfect circles, as if something had been drawn repeatedly and erased. No bodies were found, no bones, no concrete evidence that Graymoor had ever existed. Newspapers called it a geographic anomaly, a mapping error, collective hysteria. Theories surfaced, vanished, were forgotten, as always. But something did not disappear. Deep underground, beneath what remained of the soil, Ethan Cross stayed conscious, not as a man, not as a body. He existed as presence, as constant pressure, as a thought that never finished forming, as a memory that refused to die. He felt everything, the earth slowly settling above him, roots growing, piercing layers of melted concrete and fossilized flesh, insects crawling through fissures that had once been veins, and above all, he felt time. Days did not pass, years did not pass. Time merely accumulated. The voices did not vanish. They organized, they no longer screamed. They whispered, they repeated entire stories, minute details of interrupted lives. Ethan could not silence them. He was the place where they existed now. Graymoor had condensed inside him. He became what remained when the city was removed from reality, the living memory of what happens when no one stays. For a long time, or something resembling time, nothing happened. Then, one day, Ethan felt something different. Footsteps. Light. Cautious. Someone was above. The sensation was distant, muffled, but unmistakable. A small group. Curious. Equipment. Voices discussing strange readings. "This doesn't make sense," a female voice said. "The magnetism here is completely irregular." "The temperature sensors, too," another replied. "It's like something alive is down there." Ethan tried to scream, tried to warn them, tried to stop it. But all he could do was vibrate. The ground responded. A fissure slowly opened, releasing a thin gray vapor. It wasn't smoke. It wasn't fog. It was memory. The researchers recoiled in fear. "Did you feel that?" someone asked. "That pressure?" Ethan felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. Maybe if someone knew. Maybe if someone remembered. But Graymoor does not allow complete redemption. The vapor began to condense. Images formed within it. A street, an old hotel, a fallen sign. Graymoor. "This looks like a city," the woman murmured, fascinated. "But there's nothing registered here." Panic returned to Ethan, deep and absolute. "No," he tried to say. "Don't bring this back." But memory cannot be contained once awakened. That night, one of the researchers dreamed of corridors that stretched too far, locked doors, and a distant siren. Another woke up crying, the smell of smoke clinging to her nostrils. A third began drawing maps of a city she had never visited. Graymoor was spreading again, not as a physical place, but as an idea. Ethan understood the true punishment. He was not the end of the cycle. He was the core. As long as someone remembered, as long as someone investigated, as long as someone had curiosity enough to dig too deep, Graymoor could exist again. Not exactly the same, but worse. In the last fragment of consciousness he retained, Ethan did the only thing he still could. He focused, gathered all the voices, all the memories, all the guilt, and whispered, not in words, but in sensation, a primal warning planted in the fear of anyone who came too close. The next morning the group abandoned the site. They reported severe nausea, panic attacks, shared dreams. The project was canceled, the area sealed off. Officially, nothing was found. But sometimes, on fog-covered roads, in small towns that don't appear on maps. People report hearing a distant siren, and for a brief moment, they feel an absolute certainty that they have been there before. Ethan Cross remains, waiting, because places like Graymoor don't need to physically exist to kill. They only need to be remembered. Ethan Cross learned something no voice had fully explained. Graymoor no longer needed form. It no longer needed streets, buildings, or visible fog. It now existed in the space between thoughts. In the months following the site's abandonment, strange reports began surfacing in different cities, far too distant from one another for any logical connection. A woman woke every night at exactly 3:17 a.m. with the sensation that someone was standing beside her bed, watching her breathe. When she turned on the light, she found handprints on the mirror, not on the outside, but inside, as if something had pressed against the glass trying to get out. A truck driver claimed he had driven through an entire town swallowed by fog, with dark streetlights and buildings without windows. He drove straight for nearly 20 minutes, until the road simply ended in an empty field. In his rearview mirror for 1 second, he swore he saw a fallen sign with a name he couldn't remember upon waking, only the crushing sensation of guilt, as if he had left someone behind. Hospitals began registering patients with the same kind of delusion. All spoke of doors that wouldn't open. All mentioned a distant alarm. All dreamed of corridors that stretched too far and walls that breathed slowly. Ethan felt all of it. Every new fear, every fabricated memory, every contaminated dream. He did not command Graymoor. He was the conduit that kept it alive. Over time, he noticed something even more disturbing. Some people recognized the place, not consciously, but their bodies reacted. When they heard certain sounds, a distant siren, the crackle of something burning, the metallic echo of a door, these people felt pressure in their chest, an inexplicable urge to cry, an absolute certainty that they had made a grave mistake at some point in their lives. Even if they didn't know what it was, those were the ones Graymoor watched most closely. Because they were not innocent, Ethan began to understand the pattern. Graymoor did not choose victims at random. It connected to those who fled, stayed silent, looked away when someone needed them to stay. It didn't need fire. It didn't need death. All it required was the choice not to act. Then something changed. One night, Ethan felt a different presence. Not curiosity, not investigation, decision. Someone, somewhere, had done exactly what he had done years before. They had left someone behind. Ethan's consciousness was violently pulled from its diffuse state. Images formed with painful clarity. A fog-covered road, a stopped car, someone screaming for help, and another person getting into the vehicle and driving away. The cycle was trying to repeat. Graymoor reacted instinctively, not as immediate punishment, but as gestation. The idea of a place began forming again in that person's mind. Small details surfaced, a street not on the map, a building seen only out of the corner of the eye, a name that refused to stay forgotten. Ethan tried to compress the memory, tried to erase the form, but he understood too late that he no longer had full control. Graymoor had learned from him. It no longer needed a single core. It could fragment. In the last image Ethan perceived before his consciousness dissolved again, he saw a new sign being slowly placed along a different road, somewhere else in the world. The name was not Graymoor, it was something else. But the phrase beneath it was the same. What is seen here does not leave. And then, for the first time since the fire, Ethan felt something like fear, not for himself, but for what he had helped create. Graymoor was no longer a cursed city. It was a model. And now, it could exist anywhere someone chose to walk away. Maybe you will never find Graymoor. Maybe you will never see strange fog or streets that don't appear on maps. But if one day, you hear someone asking for help, and decide it's not your problem, pay attention. Because places like Graymoor do not appear out of nowhere. They are built one choice at a time. And once created, they never disappear completely. If this story found a place inside you, don't leave. Subscribe to the channel, activate the bell. Because some stories don't end when the video does. They come back, and you'll want to be here when they do.